You just played rook c1 and it looks great. Your pieces are all lined up facing the black king, and now you have yet another attacker coming into the game. Your opponent plays queen h7, but you don't care. You play knight b5, you have checkmate coming from all kinds of different angles, and it really looks like the game is about to end, no matter what your opponent plays. Black says call an ambulance, but not for me, and slides their queen over to h2. Suddenly, you are the one losing the game and have no idea what just happened. That moment, that exact feeling, is the #1 reason players lose games at every single level. And it all comes down to one habit that most people never actually build. And I promise by the end of this video, you'll have a completely different way of looking at the board. Before we get into it, quickly take a look at this position and drop your answer in the comments. What would you play here for white? We'll come back to this exact position at the end of the video, so don't overthink it. But anyway, back to what I was talking about. There's actually a word for this concept in chess: prophylaxis. It sounds technical, but the idea couldn't be simpler. Before you make your move, stop and ask yourself one question. What does my opponent want to do? What are they threatening right now? What are they trying to build? What would their ideal next move be? Once you can answer that, you can start making decisions that actually account for the other player at the board. And look, I get this sounds obvious. Of course you should pay attention to your opponent. But here's the thing, chess is exciting, and often your own ideas feel urgent. You see a cool plan forming, you want to execute it, and your brain just forgets there's another person on the other side of the board with their own agenda. It's not a skill issue, but a focus issue, and almost every player at every level falls into this trap more than they'd like to admit. The moment you genuinely start asking, what does my opponent want? Before every single move, a huge chunk of your blunders and losses will just stop happening. But here's what makes this even more interesting, because this concept doesn't stop being relevant as you improve. It just gets deeper, and what it looks like in practice is completely different depending on where you're at right now in your chess journey. If you're a newer player, prophylaxis is almost entirely about immediate threats. Your opponent moves their knight. Is it now threatening to take your queen? They move their bishop. Does it now attack your rook on the other side of the board? A huge percentage of games at this level are decided by one player simply not noticing a direct threat on the very next move. The habit here is simple but powerful. After every opponent move, before you do anything else, look at the piece they just moved. Where is it now? What squares does it control? What does it attack? Make this a ritual. You can even draw out the squares on chess.com if that makes it easier to visualize. And if you actually want to improve, do this for every single move, no exception. Once you've stopped blundering pieces in one move, you can start looking out for the sneakier threats. Your opponent isn't just attacking your pieces directly anymore, they're setting things up. Maybe they just pushed a pawn that looks completely harmless, but that pawn move secretly exposed a bishop that is now threatening to take your knight. This is where you need to start thinking one move ahead on their behalf. Not just, what did they just threaten, but what are they trying to create? Meaning, if they play a pawn move, don't just think about what threats the pawn creates, but what diagonals or files did that pawn expose. And once you're a more advanced player, prophylaxis becomes a full strategic weapon. The best players at this level don't just react to threats. They see their opponent's plan forming 5, 6 moves out, and they quietly dismantle it before it ever becomes dangerous. A move that kills your opponent's best plan is often more powerful than executing your own. Let me show you exactly what all of this looks like on the board, because seeing it in real positions is where it actually clicks. Here's the first position. White plays bishop g5. This is when you ask, what are they trying to accomplish? They activated their bishop, and you might also notice that bishop is hitting your queen. With that in mind, you can play something like knight to f6, both developing a piece and defending your queen. White responds with knight d5. Again, what's their threat? You can see the knight is clearly attacking your knight, and if you ignore it, white will destroy your pawn structure for the rest of the game. So you simply play bishop e7, defending the knight, but at the same time developing your piece. That's the whole lesson at this level. Don't just play moves mindlessly, always keep an eye out for what your opponent is doing. And if now they play something like bishop e2 getting ready to castle, they haven't created any new threats, so now you can play freely. If you thought that first one seemed a bit too straightforward, here's the second position. Black has a dominant position here, being up 2 pawns and having a much more active position in general. White plays c4. Most chess beginners would probably think, okay, so they just pushed their pawn, they are attacking my pawn, I should take the pawn. However, in this position, that is not enough. White's plan with c4 had nothing to do with the pawn. You had to consider what that pawn move did indirectly. In this case, White's bishop opens up and is now hitting your knight. White's queen is already pinning down your g-pawn to your king, so it's not just a simple trade. You would be losing the knight with no compensation, and White would immediately threaten checkmate as a cherry on top. If you just push your pawn forward instead, you actually not only defend the bishop threat, but also save your pawn and dominate the center with it. Sometimes you have to be thinking outside the box to spot your opponent's plans. However, the third and final position is my favorite, because here Prophylaxis isn't defensive at all, it's a weapon. White can see that black is preparing to castle their king away to safety. They play knight f6 and are now one move away from castling. Most players would just keep going with their own development and play a move like bishop g5, which is not too bad of a move, but it allows black to execute their plan and get their king to safety. The right move here is e5, challenging the center. It's a very versatile move because it creates immediate problems for black, meaning they cannot castle. Black takes your pawn, but you don't take back. You play bishop a3, yet again preventing black from castling. And now black has a really difficult situation. They are forced to leave their king in the center of the board when the center pawns have been traded, and White's rooks can take over the e and d files and dominate the position. That right there is Prophylaxis at its highest level. So now the real question, how do you actually build this as a habit in your own games? Because knowing about Prophylaxis and genuinely having it as a reflex are two very different things. Here's something you can do right now. For your next 10 games, doesn't matter the time control, doesn't matter the result, before every single move you make, say this out loud or in your head. My opponent just played blank. They are threatening blank. Their plan is blank. Fill in all 3 blanks before you touch a piece. At first this is going to feel slow and a little awkward. That's completely normal. You're building a new mental habit from scratch, and that always feels clunky at the beginning. But here's what's going to happen. After a few games, you'll start catching threats you would have completely missed before. You'll feel your opponent's plan taking shape, and you'll actually have time to do something about it. After 10 games, you won't need to say it out loud anymore. It'll just be part of how you look at the board. And that shift, that moment when you stop playing chess against yourself and start playing chess against your opponent, that's when your rating starts moving. Give it a try and drop a comment with your results. I genuinely want to hear if this clicks for you. Alright, remember that position I showed you at the start? Let's go back to it now. White is completely winning. Up a knight and a pawn, the natural move, the move almost everyone plays here, is king f3. Bring the king closer, support the attack, finish the job. Completely logical, but stop. Before you play it, what does your opponent want to do? Black's king is stalemated in the corner. That's not just a problem for black. It's actually a problem for white too. Because if white isn't careful, black can sacrifice their lone rook, force white to take it, and the game is an instant draw by stalemate. And that's exactly what happens after king f3. Black starts checking your king over and over with the rook. You have no choice but to keep moving, and eventually you're forced to take it. The game ends in a draw from a completely winning position. The prophylactic solution is almost counterintuitive. Instead of marching your king forward, you first play a move that gives black's king an escape square. Open up a little room in the corner. Now stalemate is impossible. Black can't force the draw no matter what they try. The trick is gone, and white converts easily. That's the entire lesson of this video in one position. You had all the material, all the advantages, all the winning chances, and the only thing standing between you and the win was one question. What does my opponent want? Ask it every single move. It will save you more games than any opening or tactic ever will. And real quick before you go, 3 things to remember, just to really ingrain this in your head. 1. After every opponent move, pause and ask what that piece is now doing. Make it a ritual, not an option. 2. As you improve, extend the question. Don't just look for immediate threats, look for the plan behind the move. 3. At the highest level, use this offensively. Once you see your opponent's plan forming, don't just react to it. Kill it before it starts. That's prophylaxis. It's a complete mental shift, and over time will change the way you think about the game. And it might be the single most impactful thing you can do for your chess right now, no matter what level you're at.